Maybe you should eat somewhere else. That is what Dr. Gerald Whitfield said for minutes before his entire world collapsed. The San Antonio steakhouse hums with Friday night energy, sizzling meat on cast iron, wine glasses clinking against stone, laughter bouncing off exposed brick walls like bullets ricocheting. Katie Rodriguez sits alone at table 7, her water glass catching the amber glow of Edison bulbs strung overhead. Dark eyes. Steady hands. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. She wears simple scrubs under a charcoal jacket, her black hair pulled back so tight it could double as a weapon. Her posture is perfect without looking rigid, the posture of someone trained to be invisible. In her right pocket, fingers brush against something tarnished. A military challenge coin. Old. Worn smooth from 18 years of pressure and touch. She doesn't realize she's doing it anymore, this unconscious ritual of contact, the way other people might fidget with a wedding ring or phone. For Master Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, the coin is the only anchor between two lives, and she's been living in the wrong one for 7 days. The nursing position at San Antonio Memorial started on a Monday. Orientation was forgettable, standard hospital videos, fire exit procedures, password policies. By Tuesday she had memorized the location of every crash cart, every exit, and the personal schedules of 3 department heads. By Wednesday, she'd already found the discrepancies in the pharmaceutical billing that would eventually lead to the investigation. By Thursday, she understood exactly how deep the corruption ran. Today is Friday, and she's sitting in a restaurant 3 blocks from the hospital, maintaining cover by doing what new nurses do on their first week, eating alone, drinking water, existing in a way that makes no one remember her face. The elderly man at table 4 doesn't know any of this. He has no idea that the young woman 40 feet away used to carry soldiers on her back through the Sanjin Valley in Helmand Province. He doesn't know that she once held a tourniquet in her teeth and ran 11 miles downhill through enemy fire with a bleeding Marine draped across her shoulders. He doesn't know that she spent the last 2 decades making decisions that cost people their lives when they were right and their lives when they were wrong, and she's learned to live with both outcomes. What he does know is that his hearing aids are working fine, but the waiter in front of him isn't looking at his face when he speaks. The waiter is looking at the menu, at the table, at anything except the old man's eyes, and his jaw is tightening with frustration because communication is breaking down in that particular way that happens in restaurants when someone is deaf and everyone else pretends it's the patron's problem. Katie notices this from table 7. She notices because she notices everything. She notices the faded tattoo on the veteran's weathered forearm, ink that's been under the skin for more than a decade, the kind of tattoo that means something specific, that marks a moment someone needed to carry with them forever. She can read it from this distance. She reads it perfectly. The letters spell her last name. The date is Bagram, 2012. The year of the 3rd tour. The year she stopped counting the lives she saved and started counting the ones she couldn't. She keeps her expression completely neutral. She cuts another piece of steak with mechanical precision, her grip steady, her breathing unchanged. The knife moves through the meat like a scalpel through tissue. Her other hand unconsciously finds the coin in her pocket again, fingers closing around it, holding on. In her peripheral vision, the man glances up and their eyes meet for exactly 1.3 seconds, the length of time it takes to recognize a face, but his clouded eyes show no recognition. He's looking at a nurse in scrubs. A forgettable woman cutting her dinner alone. He's not looking at Master Chief Rodriguez. He has no idea that the person across the room was the last face he saw before everything went dark in Bagram. And then Dr. Gerald Whitfield strides through the dining room. He moves like a man who owns the space, shoulders back, chin up, the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of being answered. Expensive slacks. A polo shirt that costs more than most people's monthly rent. His hair is graying at the temples in a way that probably took him 3 tries to achieve naturally, or maybe he pays someone to make it look that way. Katie has already profiled him completely during their single interaction at the hospital 4 days ago, a 30-second exchange in the hallway where he'd asked her name and then never used it again. His power source is institutional. He sits on the hospital board. He plays golf with people who make decisions. He's the kind of man who has learned that arrogance is indistinguishable from confidence if you never hesitate. He spots the interaction at table 4. The waiter's frustration. The old man's isolation. Instead of turning away, Whitfield changes direction. He walks straight toward the veteran's table like a man walking toward something he's decided to fix. Katie watches. She doesn't move. Her steak doesn't taste like anything anymore, but she keeps cutting it, keeps raising the fork to her mouth, keeps swallowing. This is what undercover means. This is what 7 days of being nobody teaches you. You don't intervene. You don't draw attention. You sit and you watch and you carry the weight of what you're seeing in the exact same way you carry the challenge coin in your pocket, quietly, privately, with the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. Whitfield reaches the table. He plants his hands on the back of a chair like a man about to make a point. The waiter steps back. 2 members of the waitstaff stop moving in the kitchen. The air pressure in the restaurant changes in that particular way it changes when attention is being paid to someone who didn't ask for it. "Sir," Whitfield says, and his voice is a specific instrument, loud enough that nearby tables can hear, but pitched at a tone that's just underneath cruelty, just below mockery, occupying that grey space where plausible deniability lives. "Sir, I'm wondering if maybe you be more comfortable with your, dining experience somewhere else." The veteran doesn't hear the words. The hearing aids are good, but they can't catch tone. They can't catch subtext. So Whitfield adjusts. He speaks louder. He slows down. He exaggerates his mouth movements, creating shapes with his lips that look less like speech and more like pantomime, the way people sometimes speak to animals or to children too young to understand language. His enunciation becomes theatrical. He points at the door. "Maybe you should eat somewhere else." Each word lands like a separate insult. In the kitchen, someone stops moving. At table 3, a couple exchanges a glance. At table 7, Katie's hands remain steady on her cutlery. Her face shows nothing. Her breathing doesn't change. She doesn't look away from her plate, but her awareness of the room has narrowed to a pinpoint, and in that pinpoint, she's recording everything, every facial expression on every staff member, the exact volume and cadence of Whitfield's voice, the angle of his shoulders, the contempt in his posture. She's filing it all away in the part of her brain that was trained over 2 decades to process threat assessment and response matrices. 2 waiters laugh. Not loud laughs. Small ones. The kind that happen because they work for someone and that someone has just given them permission to find something funny. The laughter dies quickly, but it was there. It existed. It happened in a room full of people, and most of those people did what most people do when they witness public cruelty: they looked away. "I'm just thinking," Whitfield continues, still speaking in those exaggerated mouth shapes, still pointing, "that this might not be the right venue for you. You know? Maybe try somewhere more appropriate. Somewhere less formal." The old man still doesn't hear the words, but he hears something. He hears the tone. His shoulders come up. His hands move to his wallet. He's a veteran, he knows when he's been dismissed. He knows how it feels to be told he doesn't belong. His eyes, clouded as they are, find Whitfield's face, and for a moment there's a flash of something there, recognition, maybe, or just the weight of being unwanted in a public space. And that's when Katie notices it. That's when she really sees the tattoo, not just reads it, but understands what it means. The letters of her last name. The date. And beneath them, words so faded they're almost invisible, but she can read them because she knows exactly what they say. Every soldier who made it back because of her hands knows exactly what those words say. She touches the coin in her pocket. Once. Twice. Her jaw clenches. Her grip on her fork tightens just slightly, enough that a trained observer would notice the change in tension, the small shift in pressure. But nobody's watching her. Everyone's watching the man being told to leave the restaurant. Her breathing remains perfect. Calm. Controlled. This is the composure of someone who learned a long time ago that restraint is more powerful than reaction, that the person who doesn't flinch is the person people should actually fear. She continues cutting her steak. She continues existing as if she's not hearing what she's hearing, not seeing what she's seeing, not recognizing the tattoo on a man's arm that tells a story she lived. Because she can't react. Because she's supposed to be nobody. Because the nursing position is cover, and the investigation into the hospital's billing fraud is classified, and if she draws attention now, if she stands up, if she speaks, if she shows that she knows this man or knows what his tattoo means, everything collapses. The operation ends. The people profiting from phantom procedures and inflated costs continue their crimes. The federal investigation loses its foothold inside San Antonio Memorial. Katie Rodriguez puts another piece of steak in her mouth. She swallows. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't blink. She doesn't give Dr. Gerald Whitfield the satisfaction of witnessing her reaction. But something has shifted. Something in the room, in the moment, in the way the universe keeps score. The coin in her pocket feels heavier. The old veteran at table 4, the Marine with her name tattooed on his arm and 3 years of memory loss clouding his eyes, has just been humiliated by a man who has no idea what he's standing next to. The waiter is now walking the veteran to the door. The old man's hands are shaking slightly as he reaches for his jacket. Whitfield has already turned away, already dismissed the interaction, already returned to the business of being important in a room full of people who will remember his face and forget this moment within the hour. Katie finishes her steak. She waits exactly 4 minutes, long enough that her exit has nothing to do with the scene, long enough that nobody connects her leaving to what happened at table 4. She sets down her fork with quiet precision. She reaches for her jacket. Her fingers find the tarnished challenge coin one more time, and this time, it's not an unconscious gesture. This time, she's making a choice. She's making a choice about what she's going to do with the information that Dr. Gerald Whitfield just provided for free. The waiter's pen hovered over his notepad, waiting. Vincent's weathered hands trembled slightly as he attempted to point at the menu, his lips moving silently, soundlessly forming words that the young server's impatient expression made clear were never going to land. The noise of the steakhouse swallowed his attempts, clattering silverware, overlapping conversations, the hiss of a sizzle plate from the kitchen. Vincent tried again, speaking louder this time, his voice strained and distorted in a way that made nearby diners glance sideways. The waiter shifted his weight, checked his watch. "Sir, I really need to." "One moment," Vincent signed, his hands moving with careful precision. The waiter stared blankly. Sign language meant nothing in this restaurant. It meant nothing to a kid making $12.50 an hour who had 4 other tables waiting. Katie watched from her table, her fork paused midway to her mouth. The elderly man wore a faded Vietnam-era jacket, the kind you only saw on men who actually lived through that war. His right side sat lower than his left, old injury, maybe combat-related, maybe just the weight of decades settling unevenly on aging bones. His name tag read Vincent. He'd been sitting alone for 7 minutes, and the restaurant's ambient noise had turned his silence into a wall he couldn't breach. Then the footsteps. Measured. Deliberate. The kind of walk that owned the space around it. Dr. Gerald Whitfield emerged from his office behind the host stand, his tailored charcoal suit moving like a second skin, his cologne arriving 3 steps before his body did, something expensive and aggressive, like a warning. At 54, he had the kind of face that belonged in pharmaceutical advertisements, chiseled jawline, prematurely silver hair, teeth that had cost more than most people's cars. He moved through the restaurant like a man accustomed to applause, nodding at regulars, his practiced smile switching on and off like a light. Then he saw Vincent. His expression shifted. Tightened. A predator recognizing prey that couldn't fight back. Whitfield approached the table with the kind of measured confidence that came from 17 years of knowing exactly how much power he held. "Sir, if you can't communicate your order, perhaps this isn't the right establishment for you." His voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a blade finding its mark. Several heads turned. A couple 3 tables away lowered their silverware. Whitfield's tone carried no anger, that would have been too honest. Instead, it was laden with condescension so thick it had weight, texture, presence. Vincent tried again, his hands moving through the air in a language Whitfield would never bother to learn. His fingers spelled out letters, formed shapes that meant food and water and please. The restaurant manager's expression didn't change. He turned to the waiter, a teenager named Marcus who'd only worked here 3 weeks, and spoke loudly enough for the entire front section to hear. This is what happens when we don't enforce standards. His smile never wavered. It was the smile of a man who'd practiced humiliation until it fit him like comfortable shoes. He leaned down toward Vincent, his face inches away, and began to enunciate with the exaggerated mouth movements of someone speaking to a child or a foreigner who didn't speak English. His jaw moved in theatrical arcs, his lips stretching unnaturally wide, each syllable overemphasized and cruel. Maybe you should eat somewhere else. 2 servers standing near the hostess stand erupted in snickers. One covered his mouth, pretending to cough, but his shoulders shook with laughter. The other made no attempt at concealment, his amusement rang out clear and sharp as broken glass. Whitfield straightened his tie, satisfied with the reaction, his eye scanning the restaurant to measure exactly how many diners had witnessed the performance. The restaurant manager was a virtuoso of public humiliation, each gesture calibrated for maximum impact. Katie's jaw clenched. Just once. A single muscle contraction that lasted less than a second, then smoothed back into neutral. Her knuckles whitened where her fingers gripped her fork and knife. She looked down at her steak, a $28 ribeye she wasn't tasting anymore, and cut another piece with deliberate, methodical precision. Her hands remained steady because steady was the only option. Shaking was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not here. Not now. Not when she was 3 weeks into a Dodd investigation that would dismantle this restaurant manager's entire operation if she played it right. The nursing position at Seattle General that she'd started last week was cover, pure and simple. The patient billing records on her phone right now, the one she'd photographed from Whitfield's desk when she'd toured the hospital's administrative offices under the pretense of orientation, showed exactly what she needed. 6 vendor contracts. His name on 3 of them. Kickbacks from medical suppliers, each one worth hundreds of thousands. The Army didn't send Master Chief Petty Officers into civilian cover for people who didn't have something worth finding. If she drew attention now, if she intervened, if she gave any sign that she was more than a new nurse having dinner alone, the entire operation would collapse like a house of cards. So she sat at her table. She took another sip of water. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She watched. Vincent pulled out a small notepad from his jacket pocket, the kind of thing a deaf person carried everywhere, a bridge between worlds that refused to learn his language, and wrote his order in careful block letters. Ribeye. Medium rare. Baked potato. The pen moved with the precision of someone who'd learned to write with extra care because writing was his lifeline. He handed the notepad to Whitfield, his weathered fingers releasing it as if offering a prayer to a god who didn't believe in him. Whitfield took it. Read it aloud, his tone shifting to something mockingly theatrical. Ribeye medium rare, baked potato, see, was that so hard? He didn't wait for an answer. His fingers crumpled the notepad paper into a ball, and he tossed it onto Vincent's plate with the casual flick of a man disposing of trash. We'll see if the kitchen can accommodate special needs tonight. The words landed like a punch. Whitfield straightened his suit jacket with both hands, addressing the restaurant now as if he'd just completed a performance, which, in his mind, he had. Folks, sorry for the disruption. We'll handle this. The laughter that followed came from at least 4 different tables. It was the laughter of people who'd learned that cruelty was entertainment, and entertainment was permission. 3 diners in the far corner recorded on their phones, the kind of people who'd share the video later, who'd watch Whitfield's performance on a screen and feel that small, electric thrill of witnessing someone else's pain made public. Vincent's face flushed a deep crimson, his hands trembling now with something that might have been anger or might have been shame or might have been both simultaneously. He didn't speak. He never could. His silence was the only weapon he had, and it was useless here. Whitfield snapped his fingers at the waiter. "Get deaf guy the cheapest cut we have. If he complains, he can leave." More scattered laughter. The restaurant manager returned to the host stand, where a couple in their 60s was waiting, and his face transformed instantly, the smile switching back on, genuine warmth flooding his features as he guided them to a table with the charm of a man hosting friends. Katie set down her utensils with deliberate care. The fork and knife landed against the plate with a soft clink that no one else heard over the resumed conversation of the dining room. She reached for her water glass and took a slow sip, her dark eyes fixed on Vincent's table across the room. Her grip on the glass was steady, the kind of steady that came from years of holding trauma shears while working in combat hospitals, the kind of steady that meant something different than the opposite of shaking. It meant control. It meant knowing that trembling came from fear or anger, and she contained neither. Only calculation. Only cold, methodical assessment. In her other pocket, her thumb found the tarnished military challenge coin she always carried, a habit from her years in special forces that she couldn't quite break even now, in this civilian cover, wearing scrubs that didn't fit her the way a combat uniform did. The coin felt warm from her body heat, worn smooth from 17 years of soldiers touching it for luck. She pressed it once, released it, then reached back to her phone to review the billing document she'd photographed. Seattle General. 6 vendor contracts. Whitfield's signature. $240,000 in consulting fees from suppliers he'd never actually consulted with. 20 minutes later, Vincent's steak arrived on a chipped plate, deliberately chipped, Katie suspected, a final insult served with food. The cut was thin and grey, the kind of meat that came from a part of the cow Whitfield genuinely believed should go to people he despised. Vincent cut into it slowly, chewed with the methodical patience of a man who'd learned to make meals last when meals were all you had. Katie continued her work, scrolling through images of pharmaceutical supplier contracts, the numbers swimming across her phone screen in columns that told stories of corruption disguised as business. And then Vincent stopped chewing. His hand moved to his chest. His face drained of color with the speed of a video set to fast forward, red rushing away and leaving only ash-pale skin stretched thin over bone. The fork clattered to his plate. It was a small sound, but in that restaurant, it was loud enough to travel. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, his disability now weaponized by circumstance, his silence transformed into something terrifying. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward with a screech that made heads turn, and his other hand clutched his chest as if he could hold his own heart inside by sheer force of will. His lips turned blue. The color change happened in seconds. Cyanosis. Katie's medical training recognized it instantly, oxygen saturation dropping fast enough to paint the blood purple. Vincent staggered 2 steps, his movements suddenly uncoordinated, as if the signals from his brain could no longer reach his limbs. He fell like a tree, like something that weighed nothing, his body crashing face first onto the hardwood floor with a sound like a watermelon dropped from a roof. The restaurant erupted. A woman at table 7 screamed, a real scream, the kind that came from witnessing something her brain couldn't immediately categorize as safe. Someone else shouted, "Oh my God," and the conversational murmur of the restaurant transformed instantly into chaos. Silverware clattered. Chairs scraped. Whitfield rushed over, his phone already in his hand, his practiced composure fracturing like ice under pressure. "Call 911. Everyone stay back." He crouched beside Vincent but made no move to touch him, his manicured hands hovering in the air as if they'd been programmed to avoid contact with anything damaged. Katie was already moving before her conscious mind had finished analyzing the scene. She set down her phone. She pushed her chair back with enough force to tip it backward, and she crossed the restaurant floor in 4 seconds flat, her feet moving with the kind of purpose that made diners instinctively clear a path. Her movements had changed. Her gait had shifted from civilian to tactical without any deliberate decision on her part, muscle memory asserting itself, 17 years of responding to medical emergencies in combat zones overriding the pretense of a new nurse eating alone. She dropped to her knees beside Vincent, her hands already moving to his neck, checking pulse points with the practiced speed of someone who'd done this before. His carotid was barely palpable. His skin felt clammy, the kind of cold that meant circulation was failing. She looked up at Whitfield, her voice dropping an octave, all question removed from it now. "Step back." It wasn't a request. 20 minutes crawled past like a wounded animal. The steakhouse's kitchen clattered on, the sound of sizzling beef, plates sliding across the pass window, servers calling orders. Katie's water glass sat untouched. Her steak grew cold. She kept her eyes forward, posture neutral, the way you sit when you're invisible. The server appeared at Vincent's table with a chipped ceramic plate. The elderly deaf veteran looked down at his food, a ribeye, medium rare green beans on the side. His weathered hands shook slightly as he picked up his fork. He began eating slowly, methodically, the way people eat when they're alone even in a crowded room. His clouded eyes were fixed on the plate in front of him. Katie watched without turning her head. The challenge coin in her pocket felt heavier than it should have been. 22 years. 3 combat tours. 47 lives saved. And she was sitting 3 tables away, cutting meat with steady hands while a man she'd once carried through enemy fire ate a meal that had been served to him with contempt. Vincent took another bite. His left hand trembled slightly as he raised his fork. Age. Maybe medication. Maybe the weight of being invisible in a room full of people. Then his hand dropped. The fork clattered against the chipped plate. Vincent's body went rigid. His right hand clawed at his chest, fingers splayed across the fabric of his shirt. His mouth opened, no sound came out, but Katie saw it, the silent scream. The desperate gasp of a man whose lungs had suddenly forgotten how to work. The steakhouse erupted. A woman 2 tables over shrieked. A server dropped a tray, the sound of breaking glass and crashing plates mixed with voices rising in panic. Someone shouted for help. Another voice called 911. Vincent's body convulsed once, then crumpled sideways, his chair toppling backward with a metallic crash that cut through the chaos like a gunshot. Katie moved. No decision. No hesitation. The calculus of 1,000 training hours took over, muscle memory that lived deeper than conscious thought. She was on her feet, crossing the restaurant floor before anyone else had finished reacting. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something in her movement that demanded clearance. A server grabbed her arm. "We called 911, the manager is..." Katie shook him off and dropped to her knees beside Vincent. His skin was grey. Clammy. Drenched in a cold sweat that had materialized in seconds. She found his carotid pulse with 2 fingers. Thready. Barely perceptible. And narrowing, she could feel it tightening like a closing fist. She pressed her ear to his chest directly, ignoring the warm wetness of his sweat against her cheek. The breath sounds were muffled, distant, as if his heart was speaking through a closed door. She lifted his chin, tilted his head back. His jugular veins distended, visibly swollen like cords straining against his neck. Pericardial fluid. Compressed ventricles. Cardiac tamponade. The heart drowning in its own fluid while the rest of the body suffocated from the outside in. Minutes. 90 seconds if she was unlucky. First aid kit, Katie said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Now. Whitfield stood frozen 10 feet away, his face the color of old paint. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Now, Katie repeated. It wasn't a request. It was a command. A server bolted toward the kitchen. Katie kept her hands on Vincent's chest, her fingers measuring his pulse, assessing, calculating. His skin was shutting down, the cooling that came when the body diverted blood to the vital organs. His lips had taken on a faint blue tint. "Who the hell are you?" Whitfield finally found his voice, though it shook. "You can't just..." Katie ignored him completely. She turned to another server standing frozen near the bar. "Needles. Sterilized if you have them. And a pen. Any pen." The server moved. Whitfield did not. The first server returned with a white plastic kit, the edges of the box already yellowing with age. Katie tore it open without ceremony, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had performed this calculation under fire, in dust clouds, with artillery shaking the ground. The needle gleamed, a 14-gauge angiocath, meant for 4-access. It would work. She found a ballpoint pen in her cargo pocket, the same pocket that held the tarnished challenge coin, the weight of 17 years and 7 impossible saves, the weight of this man's life in her hands again. She disassembled the pen with 3 practiced movements, removing the ink chamber, creating a hollow tube. The plastic felt fragile against her fingers. Whitfield stepped forward, his face transforming from confusion into something harder. Anger. Fear. The recognition that control was slipping. "What are you doing?" "I'm the manager here and I'm telling you to stop. We need to wait for paramedics." "You can't just." Katie didn't look at him. She cleaned the needle with an alcohol wipe from the first aid kit, the sharp smell of antiseptic cutting through the steakhouse's usual aromas of beef and butter and expensive wine. She located Vincent's subxiphoid space, the soft triangle of tissue below the sternum, the gateway to the pericardium. Her left hand found the landmarks, ribs and cartilage, the silent geography of anatomy she'd learned when she was 23 years old and already had blood under her fingernails. "If I don't do this in 90 seconds, he dies," Katie said quietly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority in those 9 words silenced the room like a kill switch. Whitfield lunged forward. His hand reached for her shoulder, his fingers closing on the fabric of her scrubs. "I said stop." Katie shrugged him off without breaking her focus, the movement smooth and absolute. His hand fell away like he'd touched a hot stove. She positioned the needle at the precise angle, 45 degrees, advancing toward the pericardium with the kind of control that only comes from having done something 100 times before. The needle breached the pericardial membrane. Blood emerged first, dark, oxygen-starved blood from Vincent's compressed ventricles. Then fluid. Straw-colored, life-saving fluid that had been crushing the heart for minutes, maybe hours. The blood and fluid filled the ballpoint pen tube, gravity doing what the pericardium could not, allowing Vincent's heart to expand for the first time in what felt like centuries. Vincent's body jerked. His chest heaved. The grey color began draining from his face like water leaving a bathtub. Oxygen flooded back into his system. Pink returned to his lips. His eyes, which had been rolling back into his skull, refocused. He gasped, a full, desperate breath that pulled from somewhere deep in his lungs. The room went absolutely silent. Not the silence of shock, though that was present. This was the silence of witnessing something impossible. The silence that happens when the dead come back to life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in amber. A glass of water sat abandoned on a nearby table, condensation sliding down its side. Katie maintained pressure on the needle, controlling the withdrawal of fluid with the patience of someone who had learned that seconds mattered but rushing killed. Vincent's color continued to improve. His respiratory rate slowed. His pulse beneath her fingers strengthened from thready to perceptible to almost normal. "Cardiac tamponade," Katie said quietly, still not looking at Whitfield. "Pericardiocentesis." She turned the needle slightly, ensuring maximum drainage. "He'll live." The first siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Paramedics. Red lights would soon paint the steakhouse windows. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't what would matter in the hours that followed, when Katie would return to Seattle General and find security waiting in the lobby, when Whitfield's phone calls to board members would already be in motion, when the cover she'd spent 3 weeks building would begin to crumble like old concrete. But for now, in this moment, Vincent's eyes fluttered open. They were still clouded, still confused, but they were alive. He looked directly at Katie, his pupils dilating as he focused on her face. His lips moved, attempting words he couldn't hear himself speak, sounds that would vanish into the air without echo. And Katie Rodriguez, Master Chief Petty Officer, Special Forces, holder of a Navy Cross and 73 classified commendations, simply nodded. Just once. A gesture that needed no translation, no sound. A message that traveled across every barrier, across years, across silence, across the distance between the woman she was pretending to be and the warrior she actually was. One message, *, I've got you. *. The paramedic's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Vincent's pupils, listening to his lungs with a stethoscope that hissed softly against the elderly man's chest. Katie stepped back, giving them space, her palms still wet. The fluorescent lights above hummed their mechanical song, indifferent to what had just unfolded on the restaurant tile. One of the EMTs, a woman with sergeant stripes on her sleeve, looked up from her assessment, eyes narrowing slightly as she studied Katie's hands. Hands that moved like they'd done this before. Many times before. That's textbook field medicine, the paramedic said quietly. Needle decompression at the second intercostal space. You military? Katie met her gaze without hesitation. Her voice came out measured, neutral. Just a nurse. The lie tasted like copper. But it held. Whitfield's voice cut through the moment like a surgical blade gone wrong. He was beside the lead paramedic now, his face flushed crimson, his hands trembling with a rage that had nothing to do with concern for Vincent. That woman assaulted my customer, he said, his voice climbing higher with each word. She performed a medical procedure without credentials. Without consent. Without any legal authority whatsoever. I want her arrested for practicing medicine without a license. The paramedic, a man with grey threading through his beard, someone who'd probably seen enough to know the difference between panic and precision, shook his head slowly. Sir, she saved his life. This man had cardiac tamponade. Another 2 minutes and he would have been dead on this floor. I don't care. Whitfield's voice had gone sharp as broken glass. I don't care if she cured cancer. This is a lawsuit. This is a criminal matter. She's not a physician. She has no authority. She attacked him. He spun toward Katie, arm extended like an accusation made flesh. I have 3 witnesses to this assault. I'm calling hospital administration right now. I'm calling the state medical board. I'm calling the police. He pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling fingers. First call went to Martin Cross, Seattle General's chief financial officer, someone Whitfield played golf with every Saturday morning for the past 8 years. Second call went to his attorney, a woman named Patricia Hayes who handled his malpractice insurance and his divorce. Third call went to the state credentialing office, where Whitfield had spent enough time in committees to know the director by voice. Each conversation lasted less than a minute. Each one ended with Whitfield's voice, she's at San Antonio Memorial. Misrepresented her credentials. Practicing without a license. I want her shut down. Katie stood slowly. Her hands were steady as she reached for a napkin from the table, wiping the blood away, Vincent's blood, still warm and red against her palms. She didn't meet Whitfield's eyes. She didn't acknowledge his continued shouting about consequences and liability and how his lawyer would be hearing about this. She simply folded the napkin, placed it on the table beside her half-eaten steak, and walked back toward the entrance. Whitfield followed her, his voice pursuing her like a weapon. You'll hear from my attorneys, he called out as she reached the door. My hospital connections will destroy your credentials. You think you can just? Katie didn't turn around. She stepped out into the San Antonio heat, where the evening air hung thick and still, and walked to her truck. Behind her, through the restaurant windows, she could see Whitfield's face, red, contorted, absolutely certain of his power. She returned to Seattle General at 6:44 p.m., still wearing her scrubs from the morning shift, still carrying the phantom weight of Vincent's crisis against her sternum. The nurses' station had the energy of a place that already knew. 2 security guards stood near the medication cabinet, uniforms crisp, expressions professionally neutral. They weren't looking at her. Not yet. But they would be soon. Linda, her supervisor, approached with a manila envelope held tight against her chest like evidence in a courtroom drama. Linda's face was sympathetic, the kind of sympathy that came just before very bad news. Katie, we need to talk. Can we step into the office? The office smelled like carpet cleaner and dying air. Linda closed the door and placed the envelope on the desk between them. Dr. Whitfield called the hospital board about 20 minutes ago. He's claiming you misrepresented your qualifications during your interview process. He says you performed a medical procedure without proper credentials at a restaurant in San Antonio, possibly assaulted a customer, and now he's demanding the hospital conduct a full credentialing investigation. Katie opened the envelope. Inside was a termination letter on hospital letterhead, typed in Arial 12-point font, effective immediately. Below it, a suspension notice. Below that, a credentialing review request marked urgent. What exactly did you do at that restaurant? Linda asked, her voice careful, professional, but underneath it, fear. Fear of liability. Fear of lawsuits. Fear that she'd hired someone who'd become a problem. A man collapsed, Katie said quietly. He was in cardiac tamponade. I performed a pericardiocentesis to relieve the pressure on his heart. Without a physician order. Without a physician present. Katie's voice didn't waver. He was dying. 40 seconds more and his heart would have stopped permanently. Linda took a breath. I believe you. But the hospital we can't be associated with this kind of liability right now. The board is concerned about our Joint Commission accreditation. Whitfield is threatening a lawsuit. And he's called the state credentialing office. Linda's eyes were genuinely sorry. I'm sorry, Katie. You were good. You were really good. But we have to let you go. Katie nodded once. Handed the letter back. I'll finish my shift. You can't. You're suspended as of now. Security will escort you. I'll stay until midnight, Katie said. Her voice had dropped an octave. It wasn't a request. I need to complete the patient charts I started. Hand off to the evening shift. Organize supply closings. Professional standards. Linda hesitated. Then she made a call to security, and they agreed to let Katie stay under supervision until 12:08 a.m. She moved through the hospital hallways like a ghost wearing scrubs. Her hands entered patient rooms, checked vitals, documented assessments. Her voice spoke to patients in that calm, methodical way nurses develop after years of holding people through their worst moments. But she was already elsewhere, already calculating damage, already running through scenarios that didn't exist anymore because her cover had been burned by a man whose bruised ego mattered more than anything else. At 12:33 a.m., the hospital laundry room was empty except for the mechanical percussion of industrial washing machines and dryers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering in a pattern that seemed almost intentional, on, off, on, off. Katie folded her scrubs methodically. White top, white pants, compression socks with the hospital logo. She folded them into precise rectangles and placed them in the return bin. Her hands, finally alone, allowed themselves to shake. It started small, a tremor in her fingers as she gripped the fabric, and built into something larger, something she couldn't contain anymore because there was no one left to contain it for. She sat on one of the plastic folding chairs used by night shift staff during breaks, and her hands trembled against her thighs. 3 weeks of cover work. Destroyed. A federal investigation into medical supply fraud. Blown. Vincent's face. Blank. No recognition of the woman who'd carried him 11 miles through the Bagram Valley after his legs were shattered by shrapnel. 11 miles at night with enemy fire cutting through the dark. 11 miles because the helicopter couldn't land and there was no other option, and the alternative was leaving him to die in that river valley. She touched the challenge coin in her pocket, tarnished brass worn smooth by 18 years of her grip, inscribed with call sign and date, and closed her eyes. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she'd been pulled out of active duty for this operation, inserted into this hospital, and now she was burned. Terminated. Blacklisted in the medical credentialing system before she'd been there 3 weeks. The DoD would have to pull her, reassign her, restart the investigation from scratch. And Vincent, the man whose life she'd saved, would never know. Would walk out of that hospital believing he'd had a heart attack, that a random nurse had helped him, that fate had intervened. He'd never know that the woman he'd watched be escorted out of Seattle General was the Master Chief Petty Officer who'd trained his entire platoon in emergency medical response. She'd failed the mission. Failed the man. Failed herself. And in the morning, when the sun came up over San Antonio, the only person who would know why was a restaurant manager who destroyed her life because she'd saved someone he wanted humiliated. By evening, Katie Rodriguez stood in the security office at Seattle General while her supervisor handed her a termination letter with the kind of trembling guilt that only came from following orders from people above his pay grade. The letterhead read effective immediately. Fraudulent nursing credentials. Unauthorized medical practice. Security had been waiting by the staff entrance when she'd clocked out, professional and apologetic about it, which somehow made it worse. The supervisor wouldn't meet her eyes. Dr. Whitfield called 3 board members personally. Said you assaulted his patient without licensure. They activated a compliance review within an hour. Katie read the letter without expression, though the words blurred slightly under the fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. 47 lives saved in theater. 3 tours. 2 Purple Hearts. And it all came down to 6 words from a man who'd mocked a deaf veteran for sport. She handed the letter back. I understand. Her voice was steady as a surgical laser. The supervisor flinched at how calm she sounded. Your badge and credentials, please. She unclipped the hospital ID that had taken her 3 years of undercover work to establish, the fake references and fabricated employment history that Dodd had spent 18 months building. Gone in the time it took one restaurant manager to make a phone call to people he golfed with. She placed the badge on the desk, turned, and walked out without another word. Midnight found her in the hospital laundry room, a concrete cavern lit by fluorescent strips that flickered like they were dying. The smell of bleach and hot cotton hung thick in the air. Katie folded her scrubs into neat thirds, navy blue, the color she'd worn for exactly 1 week before becoming unemployable, and placed them in the return bin with hands that had held her composure through humiliation, through firing, through the complete dismantling of her cover story. The bin was cold stainless steel. She pressed her palms flat against it for 3 seconds, breathing in the chemical sting of industrial detergent, and then she was alone enough that her hands could do what they'd been denied all day. They trembled. Not from fear. Not from defeat. From restraint finally released, from the weight of watching a man destroy her credibility for saving his victim, from the knowledge that somewhere out there Vincent, the elderly deaf veteran whose tattoo bore her name, didn't even know she'd been his nurse. He didn't know she'd been fired for keeping him alive. The trembling lasted 7 seconds. Then it stopped. She closed her eyes and became stone again. The next morning, the news came on a hospital lobby television Katie would never watch from inside these walls again. The broadcast froze mid-sentence, because something about the image on screen made every person within earshot stop breathing. Authorities searching for decorated Master Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, who disappeared 3 weeks ago while on classified assignment. Sources confirm the Special Forces combat medic specializes in trauma response and has saved over 40 lives in active theater operations. If you have information regarding Master Chief Rodriguez's whereabouts, the anchor's voice became background noise. What mattered was the photo, Katie in dress blues, medals ascending her chest like a story written in ribbons. What mattered was the red banner scrolling underneath, missing. Classified operation. Do not approach. 37 miles away, in the lobby of Seattle General, Gerald Whitfield stood at the administrative desk signing paperwork for his wife's elective cosmetic surgery, a $28,000 procedure that insurance would somehow cover. His pen was mid-signature on the final form when he glanced up at the overhead television. The color drained from his face so completely that the administrative assistant asked if he needed water. He didn't respond. He was reading the photo. Reading the name. Reading the cascading realization that just a nurse who'd humiliated him by saving his victim's life was not a nurse at all. She was a Master Chief Petty Officer. She was active military. She was the subject of a federal missing persons alert. And his phone call to the board members, the complaint that had triggered her termination, had activated something far larger than a credentialing review. The lobby doors opened, and the deaf veteran entered on a walker, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body had survived things it shouldn't have. His name was Vincent Chen. He had been an electrician once, before an IED in Bagram took his hearing and nearly took everything else. Walking beside him was a rigid-postured man in his 60s, crew-cut grey hair, eyes that scanned rooms like they were still reading terrain. The man locked eyes with Whitfield and said one sentence that sounded like a rifle bolt chambering. Master Chief Rodriguez used callsign Guardian 6. Whitfield's mouth went dry. A hospital security guard, a younger man with the bearing of someone who'd served, snapped to attention so sharply his shoes clicked against the tile floor. Master Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez. 22 years active service. Navy Cross recipient. 3 combat tours. He paused. Bagram, 2012 to 2014. Helmand Province. And Kandahar. And then the glass doors to the administrative wing opened, and a silver-haired general in dress uniform walked through, his uniform so creased and perfect it looked like a weapon. He was holding a file. He opened it and began reading aloud, his voice the color of storm clouds. Combat record shows 214 direct medical interventions in active theater. 47 confirmed lives saved. Bronze Star. Silver Star. Second Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. He paused between each medal, letting the weight of them settle like rounds impacting armor. And a Navy Cross. He closed the file. That last one was for carrying a wounded soldier 11 miles through enemy fire near Bagram airfield when her own leg had a compound fracture. She wrapped his wound with her own tourniquet and walked him out of the kill zone. The general looked up from the file. The soldier she carried was Vincent Chen. Vincent stepped forward with the trembling deliberation of old age and older trauma. He pulled up his sleeve with one weathered hand, and the tattoo revealed itself in full. Rodriguez, Bagram, 2012, and beneath it, in script so carefully done it must have taken hours, the words "She carried me home." The lobby went silent. Not the casual silence of a busy hospital between pages. The deep, ringing silence of a room that has just understood what it has been witnessing. Whitfield backed up 3 steps, his hands rising automatically, palms out, the universal gesture of a man realizing he'd been standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. Wait, I didn't know, I was protecting the restaurant, she didn't identify herself. The general cut him off with the precision of a surgeon. You filed a complaint against Master Chief Rodriguez with Seattle General's credentialing board. That complaint triggered a DOD internal review into her credentials. He pulled out another document. The paper was thick, official, stamped with the Department of Defense seal. The review uncovered your arrangement with MedSupply Solutions. 15 separate contracts. Inflated pricing. Kickback deposits to an offshore account registered under your wife's maiden name. $847,000 over 4 years. Whitfield's mouth opened and closed like a fish in a tank. Those are legitimate business. The rigid-postured veteran stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was ice water over broken glass. You demanded she be fired for saving a man's life. You called in favors to destroy her nursing credentials. He paused. His next sentence carried the weight of command authority. Your actions activated a federal investigation. The general nodded, and 2 federal marshals emerged from the administrative offices behind Whitfield, dark suits, badges on lanyards, the kind of men who existed in the spaces between civilian and military law. One of them produced handcuffs that caught the fluorescent light like silver teeth. Dr. Gerald Whitfield, you're under arrest for healthcare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and violations of the False Claims Act. The marshal's voice was matter-of-fact, the tone of someone reading items off a grocery list. The handcuffs clicked shut around Whitfield's wrists with a sound that echoed across the lobby like a gavel. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. No, this is a mistake. I have lawyers, I know people. The general's expression didn't change, didn't soften, didn't acknowledge the man in handcuffs as anything but a problem being solved. The people you know? 3 board members who approved your contracts are also under investigation. Your network is your evidence. He gestured once, a small movement of his hand, and the marshals began moving Whitfield toward the sliding doors. The man walked past Vincent, who met his eyes with quiet dignity, not anger, not satisfaction, just the steady gaze of someone who had survived worse and would survive this too. Whitfield walked past the security guard still standing at attention. He walked past nurses and physicians and administrative staff who had worked under his condescending authority for years, who had heard him mock patients and demean colleagues, who had watched him build his power on the suffering of people who couldn't fight back. Someone in the crowd slow clapped. A single sound, deliberate and stark. Then another person joined. Then another. Then the entire lobby erupted in applause like thunder rolling through a canyon, and Whitfield was led toward the parking lot where federal agents were already approaching a Mercedes-Benz, where his wife was about to understand that the cosmetic surgery would never happen, that the life they had built on inflated contracts and kickback schemes had just collapsed under the weight of one dead veteran's name on one nurse's forearm. 2 minutes later, Katie Rodriguez entered through the staff entrance in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a navy windbreaker, a small duffel slung over one shoulder. The applause died instantly. The lobby became a held breath. Vincent turned, his clouded eyes finding hers across the distance, and tears began tracking down his weathered face. Katie crossed toward him, her movement economical and precise, the kind of gait that had carried men through mountains and deserts and hospital corridors. She stopped 3 feet away, maintaining the distance of military respect. Vincent. His name was all she said. His voice was all he could manage, Chief. He reached out, and she closed the distance, and his hand gripped hers with surprising strength, the grip of someone holding onto someone who had already saved his life and was doing it again, this time by bearing witness to his name, his service, his worth. No words. 2 soldiers who had carried each other through different kinds of fire. The general watched from across the lobby. The marshal's radio crackled softly. And somewhere in the parking lot, a door slamming shut marked the end of something Whitfield had thought was beginning. 2 years later, a San Antonio Community College, Building C, Room 108. Gerald Whitfield stood before 12 students in a basic CPR certification class, demonstrating chest compressions on a plastic dummy with a mannequin's patient smile. His hands shook slightly as he counted, 1, 2, 3, 4. His voice carried none of the authority it once had, it was small now, thinned out, the voice of someone teaching a script he no longer believed in. He wore a cheap polo shirt that had begun to pill at the collar. His glasses were held together with tape at one lens. $15 an hour. 3 evenings a week. His medical licenses revoked. His assets seized. His reputation destroyed by the investigation he himself had triggered with one angry phone call. A student raised her hand. "Weren't you that doctor? The one on the news?" Whitfield's jaw tightened. "That's not relevant to CPR technique." He turned back to the dummy. "Let's focus on hand placement." The student pressed harder, "The one who got arrested for fraud. You tried to get that Navy SEAL nurse fired, right?" The room went very quiet. Whitfield closed his eyes, breathed slowly through his nose, and answered with the kind of honesty that only comes from complete defeat, "Master Chief." She was a Master Chief petty officer. His voice was barely audible. "And yes, I did." He completed the rest of the class in silence, correcting technique with soft suggestions, never raising his voice, never commanding anything from anyone. When the students filed out, one of them paused at the door. "For what it's worth, she sounds like she was a good nurse." Whitfield didn't respond. He began packing the CPR dummy into its case, his hands moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that small, quiet actions were all he had left. Across San Antonio, at a secure DOD facility buried behind 3 checkpoints and a cover story about being a maintenance building, Katie Rodriguez sat in a briefing room with her commanding officer. Mission folders spread across the table like a map of the world's remaining problems. The tarnished military challenge coin sat between them. Vincent had given it back to her in the hospital lobby 2 years ago, pressing it into her palm and saying nothing, because words weren't the language the coin spoke. Her CO reviewed her new assignment with the efficiency of someone whose job was to keep the machinery of national security running, undercover at a VA hospital in Phoenix. 6 months, maybe longer. We've got flags on their surgical supply chain. Similar pattern to what you uncovered in San Antonio. Katie picked up the coin, ran her thumb over its worn surface, feeling the grooves of a currency more valuable than cash. When do I start? Her CO slid a new identity packet across the table. Fresh credentials, fresh history, fresh name, Monday. You'll be Nurse Sarah Mitchell, recent transfer from Oregon. Your references are solid. The background is clean. Katie nodded once, opened the packet, reviewed the details with the efficiency of someone who had worn a dozen identities and made them all fit like skin. She pocketed the coin. No hesitation. No complaint. No acknowledgement that she had just lost a career, lost a cover story, lost the woman she had been pretending to be. The work continued. It always continued. The world kept breaking. And the quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe to Code Whisperers and hit the notification bell so you never miss the moment when the quiet ones finally reveal who they really are. Thank you for watching.